Hi everyone, we're launching a new series today with the Mesilla Valley Jazz and Blues Society. We're going to be putting some little articles in the newsletter that are drawn from my textbook, Jazz Basics, and I'm going to be supplementing them with some YouTube playlists and things for people to explore. The first one I'm going to do, because it's selfishly my favorite thing, are the cult vocalists, people like Dave Frishberg, Bob Dorough, Blossom Dearie, and others. And I'm going to start you off the way I started off. I was in the 10th grade. I was watching Johnny Carson. Do you miss Johnny Carson? I miss Johnny Carson. And I remember seeing this very performance, Dave Frishberg on the Carson Show singing the song My Attorney Bernie. I was so blown away by it when I saw it, I jumped in my Ford Pinto with a picture of wood on the side, and I drove an hour and a half to Memphis, Tennessee to a real record store where I bought a real vinyl record, and I took it home and listened to it. These kids today, I tell you, they got no clue how lucky they are with the access that they have. And once I discovered Dave Frishberg, and started learning more about him and his life, I realized that I already knew these people. Frishberg's the youngest of the three, of Bob Dorough and Blossom Dearie. And I realized that I'd been watching from the early 70s a little series called Schoolhouse Rock's cartoon series that ran on ABC for many years. Bob Dorough put that together, and he got all his cult vocalist friends to help him. And so I'm going to take you through some of that as we go through this list and show you some other things these artists did. So I start you off with Frishberg because it's the song I knew and loved first. And then I've got a very short snippet from the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters tribute to Bob Dorough. Dorough got the NEA Jazz Master Award just before he passed away. He was very pleased to have gotten it, but he couldn't be at the service. Unfortunately, it turned into a memorial for him. This is a little snippet from an hour and a half long show that is elsewhere on the internet. And it features other artists. It's not just him. But it's a good introduction to him and his music, including the Schoolhouse Rock stuff. And then I take you back to one of his earliest tracks, his first commercial album done in New York City not long after he came there from Arkansas. And this is him doing a vocalese version of Yardbird Suite, Charlie Parker. He actually hung out with Charlie Parker, played with Charlie Parker, did Charlie Parker's music. He got to know Miles Davis, and in the early 60s, Miles was asked to contribute a track to a Christmas album, a compilation jazz Christmas album. And Miles basically said, what am I supposed to do for that? What, they want me to play White Christmas or something? I don't know what to... And so he collaborated with Bob Dorough, and they wrote a very different kind of Christmas song. Some of you may recognize it. It's called Blue Xmas. And a few years later, a lot of people don't know this, Dorough collaborated again with Miles, a tune called Nothing Like You, and it's on the Sorcerer album, and it kind of sticks out. It doesn't quite fit that record, to tell you the truth, but it's just such a great track if you're a cult vocalist fan. People have celebrated Schoolhouse Rock in the last 20 years. There's even been a live Broadway show of it, and this is a little compilation of Dorough being interviewed and talking about the creation of some of the stuff from Schoolhouse Rock, including probably the most famous song, Conjunction Junction, which features the great Jack Sheldon, who I'll get to in just a minute. So you've got that whole video. There's some talking, and there's a cartoon in there as well. I included 3 as a magic number. That's Dorough singing his own song. I think it's just one of the most hauntingly beautiful tunes. And yeah, it's just an educational tune, but it's just a cool, clever tune, and it really speaks to his brilliant writing style. Dorough does have kind of a softer, darker side, though, and I want to show you 2 of those. This one is from one of his albums in the 70s. It's called Yesterday I Made Your Breakfast. Very touching song. And he wrote one of the greatest jazz ballads of all time that not near enough people know or do. It's called Small Day Tomorrow. Janice Siegel from the Manhattan Transfer recorded it on one of her early solo albums, and this was back when we still made music videos and actually showed them on TV. This ran on VH1 for quite a while. If you watch carefully, you'll see the great trumpet player Lou Soloff in here. Bobby McFerrin gets a little cameo appearance in here. Several other good musicians are in there. It's kind of cool. It's a beautiful video, and it's a lovely song. And Bob sings it good, but Janice sings it great. I introduced Blossom Dearie to the group last time when I talked about French jazz, because Blossom, of course, and Dorough too, to an extent, got some of their early start in France. And so I won't do that stuff again, but I want to play you a couple of classic Blossom tracks. Blossom has this beautiful voice of this kind of precocious little 6-year-old girl, but she sings in such a wily, womanly way, and it's really fascinating, the juxtaposition of the two. I love the way she recast kind of standard tunes. Here's Tea for Two and the Surrey with the Fringe on Top from a couple of her early albums. From a later album, Blossom was really into discovering more obscure Broadway cabaret type show tunes. Here's a tune that not a lot of people know, Little Jazz Bird. This is a George Gershwin tune, but it's not one of his biggest hits. It should be. And finally, I've got her doing a tune called I'm Hip. And the way she introduced this tune every time she did it was this. Bob DeRoe wrote this tune. Dave Frishberg wrote the lyrics. She sang it, and she said, DeRoe and Frishberg wrote it. I made it famous. So this is the tune I'm Hip, and you can find elsewhere performances of all those artists doing it. I'll take you back to Dave Frishberg for a minute with one of my favorite tunes, and this is off a live album, and for whatever reason, the person who posted it on the internet posted it in 3 separate files. So you want to listen to the introduction first, then the tune itself, and then he did a little parody on it. This is by my friend Dan Barrett, who plays regularly at the Roswell Jazz Festival. And it's a play on words. Eastwood Lane was an actual composer in America, and he was he's probably most famous in the jazz world because he was really popular with Bix Beiderbecke. Bix loved Eastwood Lane's writing, and Frishberg tells you that story a little bit. But then the song Eastwood Lane is actually not about the person Eastwood Lane. It's a fictitious thing. He'll tell you all about it. But it's a beautiful, beautiful tune. Dan's writing is great. Frishberg's lyrics are great. Frishberg's first big song was a tune called Peel Me a Grape. He wrote it in New York, and Blossom Dearie and several others recorded it, and he thought, I'm going to be a famous songwriter. And he said it was 10 years before somebody recorded another one of his songs. One of my favorite versions of the tune is Diana Krall. This is from a live Studio West 54 session, and it's just fantastic. Then we move on to Jack Sheldon, another great cult vocalist. This little video is a snippet from a longer documentary about Jack. It deals a lot with his playing, not as much with his singing, but it's a good introduction to Jack. And he was such a phenomenal player and singer. Those of you who are old enough to remember Verve Griffith and some others, Sheldon was the music director for several different people, which is kind of cool. So you'll see that, and then you've already seen Conjunction Junction. I put Rufus Xavier Sarsaparilla on here. This is a wonderful DeRoe composition that nobody but Jack Sheldon could have sung this tune. His enunciation is perfect. His humor is spot on. He was absolutely brilliant. There's another side to Jack Sheldon, though. He's kind of a crusty old dude, and there is a very famous kind of underground cult record by a guy named Durwood Douchet. You can pronounce it any way you want. Band in Blue. And this has been a party record for many years in musical circles. It was released on CD briefly, and it immediately went out of print. You can find it on eBay now for about $200, which is kind of crazy. The cleanest song on the record is the one that Jack Sheldon sings. We all call it the Doo-Doo Blues in the jazz world. It's actually called These Remind Me of You. It's actually clean lyrics, but only sort of. So listen carefully. That's one of the things about the cult vocalist. So much of it is lyric driven, which is really interesting. Another great guy who was a phenomenal musician like Sheldon is drummer Grady Tate, but he had a second career as a singer. Here's another one of the Schoolhouse Rock's tunes. This is Naughty Number 9. He does a great job with it. And here's a very obscure soundtrack from a 1960, I think 68, 69 film called Slaves. This film is uneven, to be frank about it, but it has its interesting moments. Dionne Warwick was featured in it, and she actually sang on the movie soundtrack. But Grady Tate came back later, working with Gary McFarlane, and the composer, and they redid sort of a supplemental version of the soundtrack. And it's a very powerful score, really uses Grady Tate's voice very effectively, which is cool. One of my favorites, the bass player Jalen Hart. Now here's another guy. Jalen Hart is a who's who bass player. There's nobody this guy hadn't played with over the years. And he just swings like crazy as a bass player, but he's also a singer and songwriter, and he writes, again, very clever, very lyric-driven material. This is from his one-man stand-up show, and it says it all. It's impossible to sing and play the bass. And then he, of course, proceeds to sing and play the bass, which is kind of cool. My favorite tune of his, Robert Frost. He's got 3 or 4 versions of it. Check it out. It's one of my favorites. The great Mose Allison. This is a little bit longer clip. This is from, I just found this fairly recently. This is from a live club show in San Diego. And I'm sorry, but I don't know who the supporting musicians are. The bass player looks familiar to me, but I can't name him. But man, Mose is at the top of his form. And the other players are very, very good. So check that out. This is an odd video. This is something somebody translated from Betamax. And the last 4 minutes of it are some freaky sci-fi movie. So, you know, when Mose Allison stops singing, feel free to bail out. But if you're interested in whatever history that is, check it out. It's kind of interesting. I put 2 tunes on here. Just we're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis as I record this. You can make your own judgments about my political statements here. One is called Your Mind is on Vacation, and the other is Ever Since the World Ended, 2 of Mose's classic tunes. Mose, of course, had a huge impact on the pop music world, on the rock and roll world, and of course on the jazz world. And I have a dear friend, the great Charlie Wood from Memphis, who now lives in London, who was heavily influenced by Mose. Charlie is a great legacy to the cult vocalist style. He writes these brilliant, lyric-intensive tunes that are just masterful and in no way talk down to the audience. I put one of my favorites on here from his first album, Of It All and Everything. The lyric, if I was in a play by Sophocles, there'd be miracle and calamity. There'd be subplot and sub-subplot, intrigue and suspicion. But this show is just a jumble. And he goes on and talks about his life. You can't do that, right? I mean, this is too hip for the room, which is what makes Charlie the absolute genius that he was. I, of course, had the honor to record with Charlie back about 12 years ago. We made an album called the Memphis Hang, and it was all Memphis musicians except me. And one of the things that the cult vocalists often do is recast other music. And we did that. We took Leonard Bernstein's Cool from West Side Story and we redid it. And I'll tell you a quick story about this particular track. This is all one take. And we planned it out so that I'd play tuba a little bit, Charlie would whistle a little bit, he'd sing it out, and then we'd just kind of vamp on the end. And I'd play for a little bit, Charlie would sing it out, and then he'd just whistle and we'd fade. We'd do a lovely long fade over his whistle. Well, I finished, I stopped playing, and Charlie started whistling. And he kept whistling. And he kept whistling, and it got hipper and hipper and hipper. So much so that, yeah, it's my little tuba record, but it ends with about 2 minutes of Charlie Wood whistling because it's the coolest. I wasn't going to put a fade in there anywhere, so you can hear that whole thing. Another one of my favorite tunes, the Melancholia. This is Schubert. This is Mendelssohn brought to the jazz world. This is brilliant art songwriting. Charlie, of course, now lives in London, and he continues to write in the great Memphis and New Orleans tradition. This is one of his newer tunes, doing the blah, blah, blah. Again, insert your own political thoughts there, but again, listen to the lyrics carefully because it's brilliant. The great Tom Waits, brilliant singer-songwriter. Tom's voice is not for everybody, but other people have adapted it and done amazing things with it. And I'll show you that. So here's 2 from his early album, Small Change. This is with Jim Hugert. Amazing players, great jazz players on this. This is kind of a stream of consciousness thing called Step Right Up. My favorite tune, the Jitterbug Boy. I'm resting in my laurels and my Hardies too. The kids today don't get that joke, but I love that joke. We are, of course, a blues and jazz society. So here's Tom Waits' tune, Invitation to the Blues. And then I've given you Holly Cole, great singer from Toronto. And you can hear how different people interpret his music. I've got Holly doing another one of his great tunes. And then, just because I love it, here's Holly doing Trust in Me. From the Jungle Book from Disney. I think that's kind of cool. Back to Tom Waits. He's singing his tune Foreign Affair. And then I just want you to hear again what other people can do with Tom's music. And so I finish up with Manhattan Transfer, their version of Foreign Affair off the Extensions album. Now, for me, that's where the playlist really stops for you. But, you know, if you want to take the deep dive and join me in total dorky geek out time, I've gone a little further. Here's Frank Lasalino, the great trombone player, who also is an overlooked cult vocalist. He was a brilliant cult vocalist. This is from Jazz Scene USA. This is him singing a tune called Please Don't Bug Me. He did an album where he was featured as Jake on a recording version of Porgy and Bess with Mel Torme and others on Bethlehem Records. This is him doing that. And Ella Fitzgerald used to sing this tune, Lemon Drop. He is crazy the way he does it, so I've enjoyed that. I've added that here. And then the rest of this is much longer videos. Some of these are over an hour long, but you've got some Dave Frishberg interviews. You've got the whole Bobby Scott, the Grady Tate soundtrack I was telling you about, a full hour PBS show of Tom Waits and Mose Allison, some stuff with Ben Sidran, Georgie Fame, great British cult vocalist, and then full shows of Georgie Fame, Ben Sidran, Michael Franks, who is also an overlooked cult vocalist. So there you go. There's a big introduction to cult vocalists. Stop here. You'll find some enjoyable music. Go all the way to the end, and you can have a total geek out. Enjoy.